The arrival. Sarah Mitchell stood at the viewport of the transport vessel, her small hands pressed against the reinforced glass as she watched the Intergalactic Academy come into view. The massive structure floated in space like a collection of crystalline flowers, its spires reaching toward distant stars. At 9 years old, she was about to become the first human student in the Academy's 1,000-year history. Approaching Docking Bay 7, announced the ship's AI in a melodious voice. Please prepare for artificial gravity adjustment. Sarah felt the subtle shift in her weight as the ship's gravity systems synchronized with the Academy's unique gravitational field. Her stomach did a small flip, but she remained steady on her feet. Weeks of preparation and training on Earth had helped her adapt to such changes. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind since the day the Academy's representatives had appeared at her small suburban home in Seattle. They had arrived after Sarah's solution to the unified field theory puzzle, a mathematical challenge that had been anonymously distributed across the galaxy, caught their attention. What they hadn't expected was to find that the solver was a human child. Remember, her mother had said during their tearful goodbye on Earth, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just be yourself. But Sarah knew better. She had to prove everything to everyone. The transport ship glided into the docking bay, a cavernous space filled with vessels of various shapes and sizes, each belonging to different species from across the galaxy. Sarah grabbed her small backpack, the only personal belongings she was allowed to bring, and waited for the airlock to cycle. When the doors finally opened, she was met by a sight that made her pause. Standing before her was Professor Zohar, the legendary Thrak instructor whose reputation had reached even Earth. The feline humanoid stood over 7 feet tall, his silver fur gleaming under the bay's lights, and his yellow eyes studied her with an intensity that made Sarah want to shrink back into the ship. Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. Welcome to the Intergalactic Academy of Higher Education. Sarah straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. Thank you, Professor Zohar. I'm honored to be here. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed the Thrak's features. You recognize me? I've studied everything I could about the Academy, Sarah replied. Your work on multidimensional puzzle theory is fascinating. She had almost said incredible, but remembered her training about Thrak cultural preferences. They respected fascination over mere admiration. Continued in next section. The story continues with Sarah's first day at the Academy, introducing key characters and establishing the unique challenges she faces as the only human student. We see her navigate the complex social dynamics, technological challenges, and the initial skepticism from both faculty and fellow students. Through her interactions, we learn more about the Academy's structure, the various alien species, and the upcoming Galactic Puzzle Tournament. The section ends with Sarah receiving her first major challenge, a preliminary test that will determine whether she can participate in the tournament. Key elements introduced. The Academy's physical structure and environment. Professor Zohar's character and initial impression of Sarah. The technological gap between humans and other species. Sarah's determination and preparation. The unique social dynamics of an interspecies educational institution. Initial setup for the tournament plot. The section builds tension through Sarah's observations of other students' reactions to her presence and her growing awareness of the immense challenges ahead. It ends with a cliffhanger as she faces her first major academic challenge at the Academy. The challenge begins. The Academy's preliminary testing chamber was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Suspended in zero gravity, the room was a perfect sphere with walls that shifted between opacity levels, creating an ever-changing environment that seemed to breathe with its own life. Around her, 20 other students floated in designated positions, each representing different species from across the galaxy. The preliminary trial, Professor Zohar's voice echoed through the chamber, will test not just your puzzle-solving abilities, but your capacity to adapt. His holographic image appeared in the center of the sphere, rotating slowly to address all participants. Remember, in the actual tournament, failure means immediate elimination. Today's trial will determine if you're even worthy of participating. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as she observed her competitors. To her left, a Quantian student's crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns, their species thought in quantum probabilities. To her right, a Meridian's multiple limbs twitched with anticipation, their neural processing speed nearly triple that of humans. The first challenge materialized before them, a four-dimensional construct that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that defied Earth physics. Sarah had studied theoretical models of such structures, but seeing one in reality made her head spin. "Begin," Zohar commanded. The chamber erupted into activity. The Chuantian's body flashed in rapid sequences as they calculated probability paths. The Meridian's limbs moved in blur, manipulating their construct with practiced efficiency. Sarah took a deep breath and focused on her own puzzle. She remembered her late-night studies on Earth, the countless hours spent with virtual reality simulations attempting to understand non-Euclidean geometry. The construct before her wasn't just a puzzle, it was a language, speaking in mathematics and spatial relationships. Sarah's fingers moved through the holographic interface, her mind translating the four-dimensional patterns into something she could comprehend. Where others saw chaos, she began to see music, a symphony of shapes and movements that followed their own bizarre logic. "Interesting approach," a voice whispered in her mind. Sarah glanced sideways to see a Talaxian student, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing with curiosity. Talaxians were touch telepaths, but in zero gravity, even proximity could create a weak connection. "Focus on your own work, NX for 27, Zohar's stern voice cut through the chamber. The Talaxian's patterns dimmed in embarrassment. Sarah returned to her puzzle, but something about the Talaxians' interrupted thought lingered. They had seen something in her approach, something unusual. She had been manipulating the construct not like the others who worked from the outside in, but rather from the inside out, as if she were part of the puzzle itself. A chime rang through the chamber. The Quantian had finished first, their crystal body glowing with satisfaction. Others followed quickly, the Meridian, two Vexi scholars, a Dortian mathematician. Sarah blocked out everything else, entering a state of complete focus. The construct in front of her began to align, not through brute force calculations like the Chuantian's approach, or the Meridian's speed-based solution, but through a kind of intuitive dance. She wasn't just solving the puzzle, she was understanding it, feeling its rhythm and flow. "Time," Zohar announced. "Disengage." Sarah blinked, coming out of her focus. Her construct hung before her, not completely solved like some others, but transformed into something else entirely. Where the original puzzle had been a chaotic tangle, hers had become an elegant pattern that continued to shift and flow. The chamber was silent. Even the Chuantian's crystalline body had stopped its usual light show. Professor Zohar's hologram expanded, his yellow eyes fixed on Sarah's construct with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Ms. Mitchell," he said finally, "you did not complete the puzzle within the allocated time." His tail swished slowly behind him. "However, you have done something far more interesting. You have found a pattern within the chaos that none of our previous students have identified." The construct rotated slowly in the zero-gravity environment, its movements now harmonious rather than chaotic. "This," Zohar continued, "is what we call emergent complexity. Instead of forcing the puzzle into a predetermined solution, you allowed it to evolve into its natural state of equilibrium." Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the chamber on her. She had failed to complete the puzzle in time, by the strict rules of the trial, she should be eliminated. But something in Zohar's voice told her that wasn't going to happen. "Congratulations, preliminary candidates," Zohar announced. 12 of you have qualified for the tournament through traditional completion metrics." His gaze swept the chamber before settling back on Sarah. "And one of you has qualified by showing us that there are still things about these puzzles that we ourselves do not fully understand." The chamber erupted into murmurs, telepathic, verbal, and electromagnetic. Sarah caught fragments of conversations in various languages, some expressing disbelief, others curiosity, and a few, unmistakable hostility. As the students began to file out of the chamber, Sarah found herself face to face with the Talaxian, NX-427. Their bioluminescent patterns formed complex sequences that Sarah had learned meant respect and curiosity. "You see them differently, don't you?" NX-427 communicated. "The puzzles. Not as problems to be solved, but as living things to be understood." Before Sarah could respond, another student shouldered roughly past her, a Zir named Crix, his angular features set in a scowl. "Luck," he spat. "Nothing but human luck. The tournament will prove what you really are." Sarah watched him stalk away, his powerful frame radiating anger. She had made it through the preliminary trial, but she had also made her first enemy. The real challenge was just beginning. Continued in next section. The section continues with Sarah beginning to understand the political dynamics within the academy, forming her first alliances, and discovering that her unique way of seeing puzzles might be both a gift and a target. She learns about the history of the tournament and why some species, particularly the Zir, view human participation as an insult to their traditions. The chapter ends with Sarah receiving a mysterious message on her room's holographic interface, an invitation to a secret gathering of students who, like her, see puzzles differently than the mainstream academy approach. But accepting the invitation would mean breaking curfew and risking her tournament eligibility. Key developments. Sarah's unique approach to puzzle solving is revealed. First, alliances and rivalries are formed. The political dynamics of the academy become clearer. A deeper mystery about the nature of the puzzles begins to emerge. Sarah faces her first major choice between following rules and pursuing understanding hidden talents. The message on Sarah's holographic interface pulsed softly in the darkness of her room, the archive. Third rotation. Those who see differently gather. Below it was a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change the longer she looked at it. Sarah knew she should ignore it. Curfew violations at the academy were taken seriously, and with the tournament approaching, she couldn't risk disqualification. But there was something about that geometric pattern, it resonated with her in the same way the puzzle in the preliminary trial had. Making her decision, Sarah slipped out of bed. She had spent the past week mapping the academy's surveillance systems, noting the blind spots and timing patterns. The humans might be considered technologically inferior, but they had perfected the art of staying unnoticed. The archive was located in the lowest level of the academy's central spire. During regular hours, it served as a repository of knowledge from across the galaxy. But now, in the quiet of third rotation when most species were in their rest cycle, it felt different, alive with possibility. Sarah navigated the darkened corridors, her sock-covered feet silent on the polished floors. She nearly collided with a maintenance drone at one intersection but managed to duck into a recess just in time. Her heart was pounding as she finally reached the archive's main entrance. The geometric pattern from the message appeared in her mind. Looking at the archive's security panel, she suddenly understood, it wasn't just a pattern, it was a key. Her fingers moved across the panel, recreating the pattern not as she had seen it, but as she had felt it. The doors slid open silently. Inside, the archive was transformed. The usual bright, clinical lighting was replaced by a soft bioluminescent glow emanating from several Talaxian students. Among them, Sarah recognized NX-427. There were others too, a Quantian whose crystal structure was more chaotic than any she'd seen before, 3 meridians with their limbs intertwined in complex patterns, and even a young Thrak whose silver fur was streaked with unusual black markings. "Welcome, Sarah Mitchell," a voice spoke in her mind. A figure emerged from the shadows, a Zir, but unlike any she had seen before. Where Crix and his friends were all sharp angles and aggressive postures, this one moved with a fluid grace. "I am Lyriel." "You're the one who sent the message," Sarah said, not as a question but a realization. Lyriel nodded. "We've been watching you since your arrival." Your approach to the preliminary trial confirmed what we suspected, you're a pattern walker. The term resonated through the room, causing the Talaxian's bioluminescence to pulse in synchronized waves. The Chuantian's crystal structure shifted, creating harmonics that made Sarah's skin tingle. "What's a pattern walker?" she asked, though something deep inside her felt like it already knew. "We are those who see beyond the surface of reality," Lyriel explained. "The puzzles the Academy uses, they're not just tests. They're fragments of something larger, something the founders left behind." The young Thrak stepped forward, his black-streaked fur seeming to absorb the Talaxian's light. "The Academy teaches that puzzles are problems to be solved through logic and computation. But we know different. We can feel the patterns, the connections between things that others can't see." "Show her," NX-427 suggested, their patterns flickering with excitement. Lyriel raised her hands, and the air between them began to shimmer. A holographic construct appeared, but unlike the Academy's puzzles, this one seemed to reach out to Sarah, calling to her on some fundamental level. "Touch it," Lyriel encouraged. "Not with your hands, with your mind." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before reaching out, not physically but with that part of her that had transformed the preliminary trial puzzle. The construct responded instantly, flowing and shifting, becoming something new yet familiar. It was like having a conversation without words, understanding without thinking. The founders weren't just building an academy, Lyriel continued as Sarah explored the construct. They were trying to understand something fundamental about the universe itself. The puzzles are their language, their way of teaching us to see what they saw. But the Academy now treats them as mere tests, the young Thrak added, his voice carrying a hint of bitterness. "They've forgotten the true purpose." Sarah's connection with the construct deepened, and suddenly she could see it, patterns within patterns, each one leading to new understandings. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "The tournament," she gasped, pulling back from the construct as realization hit her. "It's not just about solving puzzles, is it?" Lyriel smiled, an expression that transformed her sharp-seer features into something almost gentle. "The tournament is a key, Sarah. The founders designed it as a way to identify those who could see beyond the surface. But over the centuries, it became a competition, a test of processing speed and computational ability. Until now," NX-427 added. "Your presence here has already begun to change things. Professor Zorer saw it in the preliminary trial, you didn't just solve the puzzle, you communicated with it." The implications were staggering. Sarah looked around at the gathered students, each one a misfit in their own way, each one seeing the world differently than their peers. "Why show me this? Why now?" "Because the tournament is more important than ever," Lyriel explained. "There are those in the Academy who want to change the puzzles, to strip them of their deeper patterns and replace them with pure logic problems. They say it's to make the competition more fair, but they would destroy the very thing that makes them special." Crix and his followers, Sarah realized. That's what they're really angry about, not just that I'm human, but that I represent a different way of seeing things. The young Thrak nodded. "They call themselves rationalists. They believe that anything that cannot be quantified and categorized is a threat to academic purity. Your success in the preliminary trial challenges everything they believe." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "We prepare," Lyriel said simply. "The tournament is not just a competition now, it's a chance to show everyone that there's more to understanding than pure logic. But to do that, you need to learn how to fully access your abilities as a pattern walker." The group spent the next few hours teaching Sarah things that would never be found in any academy curriculum. The Talaxians showed her how to expand her awareness beyond physical senses. The Quantian demonstrated ways to perceive multiple probability streams simultaneously. The Meridians taught her to process information not just sequentially but in parallel patterns. But it was Lyriel who showed her the most important thing, how to trust her intuition while maintaining control. Pattern walking is not about abandoning logic, she explained. It's about finding the harmony between intuition and reason. As the Academy's day cycle began to approach, Sarah realized she had learned more in these few hours than in all her previous classes combined. But she had also learned something else. She was part of something bigger than herself, bigger than the tournament, maybe even bigger than the Academy itself. Remember, Lyriel said as they prepared to leave, you're not alone anymore. The patterns connect us all. Sarah nodded, her mind still buzzing with new understanding. As she made her way back to her room, carefully avoiding the security systems, she felt different, more aware, more alive. The tournament was approaching, but now she knew it was more than just a competition. It was a chance to awaken something that had been sleeping for centuries. Continued in next section. The chapter continues with Sarah beginning to integrate her new knowledge while maintaining her regular academy studies. She starts to notice patterns everywhere, in the way different species move, in the academy's architecture, even in the seemingly random schedule of classes. But she also realizes she's being watched more closely now. Crix and his followers seem to sense that something has changed, and their hostility becomes more overt. Even some of the faculty begin to pay more attention to her, though she can't tell if it's out of concern or suspicion. The section ends with Sarah making a shocking discovery in one of her practice sessions, a pattern so profound and far-reaching that it suggests the Academy itself might be one massive puzzle, designed by the founders for a purpose that has been long forgotten. Key developments. Introduction of the pattern walkers and their significance. Deeper exploration of the Academy's true purpose. Formation of opposing ideological factions. Sarah's growing awareness and abilities. Setup for the larger mystery surrounding the founders. Escalating tension with the rationalists. The tournament. The morning of the tournament arrived with an unusual phenomenon, a quantum aurora that bathed the Academy's spires in shifting waves of possibility. Sarah watched from her window as reality itself seemed to flutter, creating patterns that reminded her of the constructs she'd been studying with the pattern walkers. An auspicious sign, NX 427, communicated telepathically from the neighboring room. The Talaxian's excitement was palpable even through the wall. Sarah touched the window, feeling the subtle vibrations of the aurora through the transparent barrier. In the 3 weeks since discovering the pattern walkers, her sensitivity to such phenomena had grown exponentially. What once seemed like random energy fluctuations now appeared as intricate dances of cosmic forces. The tournament would be held in the Grand Amphitheater, a massive space that could adjust its dimensions to accommodate various gravitational preferences. As Sarah made her way there, she noticed subtle changes in the Academy's usual routine. The maintenance drones moved in different patterns, the atmospheric processors hummed at a slightly different frequency, and even the artificial lighting seemed more focused, more intentional. "They've changed the security protocols," Lyriel whispered as they passed in a corridor. The Zir's angular features were tight with concern. "The rationalists have convinced the administration to implement new anti-tampering measures." Sarah nodded slightly, understanding the implications. The rationalists, led by Crix, were trying to restrict the tournament to purely computational challenges, eliminating the deeper patterns that the founders had embedded in their puzzles. The Grand Amphitheater was already packed when Sarah arrived. Students and faculty from every known spacefaring civilization filled the gravity-controlled tiers, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. At the center, the tournament arena hung suspended in a null-gravity field, surrounded by holographic displays that would project the puzzles. Professor Zorer stood on a raised platform, his silver fur almost metallic under the amphitheater's lights. "Welcome to the 1247th Galactic Puzzle Tournament," his voice resonated through the chamber. "Today's challenges will test not just your problem-solving abilities, but your understanding of the fundamental principles that govern our universe." Sarah took her place among the other competitors. 13 had qualified through the preliminaries, but she could sense the invisible line dividing them, pattern walkers on one side, rationalists on the other, with a few uncertains caught in between. The first round began with what appeared to be a standard dimensional manipulation puzzle. But as Sarah connected with it, she felt something different, something wrong. The puzzle's underlying patterns were muted, as if someone had tried to suppress them. Binary processing only, announced the chief examiner, a Dortian mathematician. Pattern recognition subroutines have been disabled to ensure fairness. From across the arena, Crix shot Sarah a triumphant look. The rationalists had succeeded in altering the tournament's very nature. But as Sarah studied the puzzle before her, she began to see something else, whispers of the original patterns, too fundamental to be completely erased. The first round proceeded quickly. 3 competitors were eliminated, their solutions falling short of the examiner's stringent requirements. Sarah advanced, but not through the usual methods. Instead of fighting against the suppressed patterns, she worked with what remained, finding ways to let the puzzle's natural harmonics guide her solutions. Remarkable adaptation, she heard Professor Zora murmur as she completed the round. His tail twitched with what might have been approval. The second round introduced multiphasic probability matrices, puzzles that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Here, the rationalists' modifications began to show their flaws. By suppressing the natural patterns, they had made the puzzles more unstable, more likely to collapse into paradox. 2 more competitors were eliminated when their solutions caused catastrophic feedback loops. Even Crix struggled, his purely logical approach unable to handle the quantum uncertainties that kept bleeding through the suppressors. It was during the third round that everything changed. The puzzle presented was supposed to be a simple topology problem, rearranging spatial relationships within a closed system. But as soon as it materialized in the arena, Sarah felt something vast and ancient stir within its structure. The founder's patterns, suppressed but not destroyed, began to resonate with each other. Across the arena, the other pattern walkers felt it too. NX 427's bioluminescence pulsed in sync with the puzzle's hidden frequencies. The young Thrax's black-streaked fur stood on end. Even Lyriel's eyes widened in recognition. "Stop the tournament!" Crix suddenly shouted. "They're manipulating the system." But it was too late. The patterns had reached a critical threshold, and the puzzle was transforming. Its surface structure dissolved, revealing layers of meaning that had been hidden for centuries. In that moment, Sarah understood what the founders had been trying to teach: the puzzles were never meant to be merely solved, but to evolve along with those who interacted with them. The holographic displays around the arena began to show not just the current puzzle, but echoes of all the puzzles that had come before. Each solution, each interaction had added to the pattern, creating a vast tapestry of interconnected knowledge. "This is impossible," the chief examiner declared, frantically trying to shut down the system. The patterns were suppressed. "No," Professor Zora's voice cut through the chaos. "They were waiting." His yellow eyes fixed on Sarah. Waiting for someone who could see them clearly enough to wake them up. The tournament arena had become a swirling vortex of light and information, patterns within patterns flowing and combining in ways that defied conventional physics. But to Sarah and the other pattern walkers, it was the most natural thing in the world. The puzzles were finally showing their true nature. In the midst of this revelation, Sarah felt her consciousness expand. The patterns weren't just in the puzzles, they were everywhere, in the Academy's architecture, in the quantum aurora still shimmering outside, in the very fabric of space itself. The founders hadn't built the Academy to test students, they had built it to teach them how to see. "The tournament is suspended," announced the chief examiner, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah was too engrossed in what the patterns were showing her, a message left by the founders, written not in words but in the relationship between all things. Continued in next section. The chapter continues with the aftermath of the pattern awakening. The Academy administration is thrown into chaos as centuries of hidden knowledge begin to surface. The divide between rationalists and pattern walkers reaches a critical point, with both sides realizing that the tournament's outcome will determine far more than academic standings. Sarah finds herself at the center of a philosophical revolution. The patterns she helped awaken begin to change the very nature of education at the academy, forcing everyone to confront the possibility that their understanding of the universe is far more limited than they believed. The section ends with a startling discovery: the patterns aren't just showing them how to solve puzzles differently, they're trying to warn them about something. Something the founders saw coming, something that only those who can walk the patterns will be able to face. Key developments. The tournament's transformation from competition to revelation. The true purpose of the founders' puzzles is revealed. The conflict between different ways of seeing and understanding reaches its peak. Sarah's role as a catalyst for change becomes clear. Set up for the final confrontation between opposing philosophies. Introduction of the founders' warning and the larger threat it implies. Beyond victory. The Academy's central spire thrummed with energy as the awakened patterns continued to spread, transforming the once static structure into a living repository of the founders' knowledge. Sarah stood in the eye of this storm, her consciousness expanded beyond anything she had previously experienced, as the true message of the founders began to take shape. They knew, Professor Zorer's voice was barely a whisper. The proud Thrak seemed humbled by what the patterns were revealing. All this time, the puzzles weren't just tests, they were preparation. Around them, the grand amphitheater had become a three-dimensional representation of the founders' vision. The patterns showed images of space-time distortions, rifts in the fabric of reality that were slowly spreading across the galaxy. The founders had seen them coming, had understood that conventional science and technology would be insufficient to address them. That's why they created the pattern walkers, Lyriel said, her Zir features illuminated by the swirling energies. They knew we would need minds that could perceive and interact with the fundamental patterns of reality itself. Crix, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally spoke. But this defies all logical analysis. These patterns, they're impossible to quantify, to predict. That's exactly the point, Sarah realized, understanding flowing through her like a river. The founders knew that pure logic, pure computation would never be enough. The universe isn't just a set of equations to be solved, it's a living, breathing thing that needs to be understood on its own terms. The patterns shifted, showing the spread of the rifts accelerating. They were tears in reality itself, places where the ordinary laws of physics began to break down. Conventional sensors couldn't detect them until it was too late, but pattern walkers could feel them forming, could potentially learn to heal them. The tournament, Sarah continued, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding those who could see differently, who could help prepare for what's coming. Professor Zorer nodded slowly. The Academy itself is a tool, designed to identify and train those with the ability to perceive these patterns. But over the centuries, we lost sight of its true purpose. We turned it into a competition, focused on speed and efficiency rather than understanding. The young Thrak with the black-streaked fur stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the pattern displays. The rifts, they're not just random anomalies, are they? They're like wounds in space-time itself. Sarah felt the truth of his words. The patterns were showing them more now, how the fabric of reality was like a living tissue, how the rifts were spreading like an infection through the galaxy. Conventional space travel, dependent on stable physics, would soon become impossible in affected regions. But we can heal them, NX-427 communicated, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing with the energy flows around them. The founders left us the knowledge, encoded in these patterns. We just need to learn how to use it. The revelation sparked a transformation in the amphitheater. The divide between rationalists and pattern walkers began to dissolve as everyone present realized the magnitude of what they were facing. This wasn't about academic superiority or competing philosophies, it was about the survival of all spacefaring civilizations. Even Crix's stance softened as he watched the patterns tell their story. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is room for both approaches. Logic and intuition, working together. Sarah felt a surge of hope at his words. The patterns around them seemed to brighten, as if responding to the possibility of unity. She understood now why she had been drawn to the academy, why a human child had been chosen to help trigger this awakening. Humans, with their unique blend of logical thinking and intuitive understanding, could help bridge the gap between different ways of seeing. The real work begins now, Professor Zohar announced, addressing everyone present. The tournament as we knew it is over, but our true purpose is just becoming clear. We must reorganize the academy, combine our different strengths and perspectives to prepare for what's coming. The patterns shifted again, showing them what needed to be done. The academy would need to change, to evolve beyond its role as an educational institution. It would become a center for studying and healing the rifts, a place where pattern walkers and rationalists could work together to protect the galaxy. We'll need to reach out to other worlds, Lyriel added. Find more pattern walkers, train them. There must be others out there who can see as we do. Sarah thought of Earth, of other human children who might have her abilities but had never had the chance to develop them. Not just other worlds, she said. We need to look in places we might have overlooked before. Every species, every culture might have something to contribute to understanding these patterns. The next few days saw the academy transform. The rigid class schedules and competitive rankings were replaced by collaborative study groups. Pattern walkers worked alongside rationalists, each bringing their unique perspectives to understanding the rifts and how to heal them. Sarah found herself at the center of this transformation, but not as a lone prodigy. Instead, she became part of a growing network of minds, each contributing their own way of seeing and understanding. The patterns had shown them that diversity of perspective wasn't just valuable, it was essential for facing the challenges ahead. 1 month after the tournament that changed everything, Sarah stood at the same viewport where she had first seen the academy. But now she saw it differently, not as an imposing institution, but as a living entity, a crucial node in the pattern that connected all things. Ready to begin? Professor Zohar asked, joining her at the viewport. They were preparing to depart on the academy's first mission to study an active rift. Sarah nodded, feeling the patterns flow around her, through her. She wasn't just the human girl who had surprised everyone anymore. She was a pattern walker, part of something far greater than herself. The founders left us a puzzle bigger than any we could have imagined, she said, watching the quantum aurora dance across the stars. And the only way to solve it is together. As their ship prepared to depart, Sarah felt a deep sense of rightness. The tournament had seemed like the end goal when she first arrived, but it had really been just the beginning. Ahead of them lay challenges that would require all their skills, all their different ways of seeing and understanding. The patterns swirled around the academy, visible now to all who had learned to see them. They weren't just beautiful abstractions, they were a map to the future, a guide to healing the wounds in reality itself. And Sarah Mitchell, the human girl who had helped awaken them, was ready to follow where they led. The end.